Captain Sarah Mitchell had been driving big rigs longer than most of the men in the room had been alive. At 52 years old, with 28 years in the Army Reserve under her belt, she'd hauled everything from medical supplies through desert sandstorms to ammunition across frozen mountain passes. Her hands were calloused, her back was strong, and her record was spotless. But none of that seemed to matter as she stood in the cramped briefing room at Fort Douglas, just outside Cedar Springs, Wyoming. "With all due respect, Captain," said Colonel Wade Harrison, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, "this idea of yours sounds like something out of a circus act." The other officers around the table chuckled. Sarah kept her expression neutral, her hands clasped behind her back in perfect military posture. She'd learned long ago not to show emotion when men were looking for a reason to dismiss her. "Sir, the numbers speak for themselves," she said evenly. "Over the past 6 months, we've lost nearly 40% of our supply convoys to ambush tactics along Route 7. The insurgents have our patterns memorized. They know exactly when we move and how we move. And your solution is to have our trucks drive in circles like a county fair." This came from Major Dennis Kohler, a thick-necked man who'd made no secret of his opinion that women had no business in combat logistics. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." "It's not circles, sir," Sarah said patiently. She'd expected this resistance. She'd prepared for it. "It's a rotating pattern with variable timing. The convoys would never take the same route twice in the same sequence. The lead truck would change positions every 15 minutes. We'd use decoy vehicles and—" "Decoy vehicles?" Colonel Harrison interrupted. "Captain Mitchell, do you have any idea how much coordination that would require? The fuel costs alone would be astronomical." "Less than the cost of replacing destroyed vehicles and lost supplies, sir," Sarah replied, "and significantly less than the cost of American lives." The room fell silent at that. 3 soldiers had died in the last ambush just 2 weeks ago. Everyone in that room had attended the memorial service. But Major Kohler wasn't about to let facts get in the way of his prejudice. "This is exactly why we need experienced combat officers making these decisions, not reserve truckers who think they know better than career military strategists." Sarah felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but she swallowed it down. Getting emotional would only prove their point, that she was too soft, too female, too unreliable for the big decisions. "I've spent 28 years in logistics, sir," she said quietly. "I've driven more combat miles than anyone else on this base. I know these roads, I know how the enemy thinks, and I know this strategy will work." Colonel Harrison sighed and rubbed his temples. "Captain Mitchell, I appreciate your dedication. I really do. But what you're proposing would require completely overhauling our entire convoy system. It would mean retraining drivers, reorganizing schedules, and convincing command that we should trust our supply lines to what you yourself called an outrageous strategy." "I called it unconventional, sir," Sarah corrected gently. "The enemy expects conventional, that's why we keep losing." "The answer is no," Harrison said flatly. "We'll continue with our current protocols and increase armed escorts. That's a proven strategy. Dismissed." Sarah saluted and turned to leave, her jaw tight. As she walked out of the briefing room, she heard Major Kohler's voice drift through the open door. "Poor woman's been driving too long. Sun must have baked her brain." The other men laughed. Sarah walked faster, her boots echoing down the hallway. She'd been disrespected before. She'd been underestimated her entire career. But this time felt different. This time, lives were at stake, and they were too proud and too stubborn to listen. Outside, the Wyoming sun beat down on the dusty parade ground. Fort Douglas wasn't much to look at. A small support base tucked into the hills outside Cedar Springs, a town of barely 3,000 people. Most folks in town worked on ranches or at the truck stop off Highway 26. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and newcomers were viewed with suspicion. Sarah had grown up here. She'd learned to drive in her daddy's pickup truck when she was 12, hauling feed to the north pasture of their cattle ranch. By 16, she was handling the big rig that took their cattle to market. By 20, she'd enlisted in the Army Reserve, determined to serve her country and see something beyond the endless brown hills of Wyoming. Now, after 3 deployments and more miles than she could count, she was back where she started. Except this time, she had knowledge that could save lives, and no one would listen to her. "Don't let them get to you." Sarah turned to see Sergeant James Chen approaching from the motor pool. He was young, maybe 30, with grease stains on his uniform and a kind smile that made him look even younger. He'd been one of the few people to actually read her proposal before the meeting. "I'm fine," Sarah said automatically. "No, you're not," James said. "And you shouldn't be. That was a good plan, Captain, really good. Doesn't matter if no one will use it." James fell into step beside her as she walked toward the parking lot. "You know what my grandfather used to say? He was a trucker, too, back in the day, cross-country hauler. He used to say that the best drivers weren't the ones who drove the fastest or the hardest. They were the ones who could think different when the road got dangerous." Sarah smiled despite herself. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." "He was. He also said that stubborn old mules sometimes need a good kick before they'll move in the right direction." "Are you suggesting I kick Colonel Harrison?" James laughed. "I'm suggesting that maybe you don't need their permission to prove your strategy works." Sarah stopped walking and looked at him. "What are you talking about?" "There's a supply run scheduled for tomorrow morning. Small one, medical supplies to the forward outpost at Miller's Ridge. It's your turn to lead it, right?" "Yes, but—" "So lead it your way," James said. "Run your strategy on one convoy. If it works, you'll have proof. If it doesn't," he shrugged, "well, at least you'll know you tried." It was insubordination, plain and simple. Going against direct orders from a superior officer. It could get her court-martialed, kicked out of the service, stripped of her pension. But James was right. 3 soldiers had died. More would die if nothing changed. "I'll need drivers I can trust," Sarah said slowly. "People who won't report me until after we're done." "I'll drive," James said immediately. "And I know 2 others who will too, Rodriguez and Kim. They're solid." Sarah thought about it for a long moment. She thought about those 3 dead soldiers. She thought about her daughter, Emily, who was a freshman at community college and wanted to join the Army herself. She thought about all the young men and women who trusted their officers to make smart decisions, to keep them safe, to value their lives above pride and politics. "Okay," she said. "Tomorrow morning, but if this goes wrong, it's on me. You all were just following orders." James grinned. "Yes, ma'am, following your very creative interpretation of our orders." That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table in her small ranch house on the edge of Cedar Springs. The house was quiet. It had been quiet since her husband, Tom, had passed away from cancer 3 years ago. Emily was away at school. It was just Sarah and the memories now. She spread out maps of Route 7 and the surrounding area. The road to Miller's Ridge was 28 miles of winding highway through rocky hills and sparse vegetation. There were a dozen perfect ambush spots along the way. The enemy knew every single one. But if her strategy worked, the enemy wouldn't know where to wait. Sarah worked through the night, plotting routes and timing sequences. She calculated fuel consumption and radio check-in points. She identified decoy paths and emergency extraction points. By dawn, she had a plan. It was risky. It was complicated. It was exactly the kind of unconventional thinking that had gotten her laughed out of the briefing room. It was also, she believed with every fiber of her being, the right call. At 0500 hours, Sarah arrived at the motor pool. 3 trucks were already running, their engines rumbling in the pre-dawn darkness. James, Rodriguez, and Kim stood beside their vehicles, ready to go. "Everyone clear on the plan?" Sarah asked. They nodded. They looked nervous but determined. "If anyone wants to back out, now's the time," Sarah said. "No judgment. This is my call, and I'll face the consequences." No one moved. "All right then," Sarah said, climbing into the lead truck. "Let's show them how it's done." The convoy rolled out of Fort Douglas at 0530, just as the sun was beginning to paint the Wyoming hills with streaks of orange and pink. Sarah's hands were steady on the wheel, but her heart was pounding. She'd made a lot of decisions in her 28 years of service, but this was the first time she deliberately disobeyed a direct order. The radio crackled to life. "Lead truck, this is dispatch. Confirm route to Miller's Ridge, over." Sarah picked up the handset. "Dispatch, this is lead. Route confirmed. Proceeding via Route 7 as scheduled, over." It wasn't exactly a lie. They would be proceeding via Route 7, just not the way anyone expected. "Copy that, lead. Checking at waypoint Charlie, dispatch out." Beside her in the passenger seat, James was studying the map with a small flashlight. "First rotation point is in 12 minutes, he said. "The turnoff to Coyote Trail." "I remember," Sarah said. She'd memorized every turn, every landmark, every second of the timing. The first part of the route was standard, straight down Route 7, just like always. Any enemy scouts watching from the hills would see exactly what they expected to see. A 4-truck convoy moving at regulation speed, maintaining proper intervals. But at minute 12, Sarah flicked on her turn signal and took a hard right onto a narrow dirt road that most people didn't even know existed. It was an old cattle trail that cut through private ranch land. Sarah had gotten permission from the owner, old Bill Henderson, the night before. He'd been happy to help once she explained what she was doing. "Truck 2, rotate to lead," Sarah called into the radio. Behind her, Rodriguez's truck pulled forward and took the lead position, continuing straight on Route 7. Sarah's truck, now in the second position, followed Kim's vehicle onto the cattle trail. James's truck brought up the rear. To anyone watching from a distance, it would look like the convoy had continued on Route 7. But in reality, half the convoy was now on a parallel route, hidden from view by the rolling hills. "Time check," Sarah said. 14 minutes to Convergence Point Alpha, James replied. The cattle trail was rough, and Sarah had to fight the wheel to keep the heavy truck from sliding into the drainage ditches on either side. Dust billowed up behind them, coating everything in a fine brown powder, but the truck handled it. Sarah knew it would. She'd driven worse roads in Afghanistan. Her mind drifted back to those deployments. She'd been younger then, stronger, less aware of her own mortality. She'd driven through sandstorms and rocket attacks, through 100-degree heat and bone-chilling cold. She'd seen things that still woke her up at night sometimes: burning vehicles, wounded soldiers, the kind of chaos that no amount of training could really prepare you for. But she'd also seen something else: the importance of adaptability. The rigid, by-the-book officers got their people killed. The ones who survived were the ones who could think on their feet, who could see patterns the enemy didn't expect, who could turn conventional wisdom on its head when the situation demanded it. That was what made a good soldier, not blind obedience, not adherence to doctrine for doctrine's sake, but the ability to assess, adapt, and act. "Convergence Point Alpha in sight," James said, breaking into her thoughts. Sarah could see it ahead, a small clearing where the cattle trail rejoined Route 7. Rodriguez's truck was already there, waiting. The two paths had taken them around a rocky outcropping that was a known ambush site. If anyone had been waiting there, they'd just wasted their time. "Truck 3, rotate to lead," Sarah commanded. Kim's truck surged forward, taking the lead position. Sarah fell back to third. Rodriguez took fourth, James second. The convoy had just completely rearranged itself, and they'd bypassed the first danger zone without ever presenting a predictable target. "How's everyone doing?" Sarah asked on the radio. "Truck 2, all good," Rodriguez reported. His voice was tense but steady. "Truck 3, solid," Kim said. She sounded almost excited. "Truck 4, no problems," James added. They continued on Route 7 for another 8 minutes. Then Sarah called for another rotation. This time they split 3 ways, one truck continuing straight, 2 taking a ranch road to the north, 1 taking a mining road to the south. They'd reconverge at the old water tower outside Pinewood, coming at it from 3 different directions. Anyone watching would have no idea where the convoy actually was. The miles rolled by. Sarah's strategy was working exactly as she'd planned. Every rotation was smooth. Every convergence was on time. The trucks handled the rough alternate routes without any mechanical problems. But Sarah knew the real test was still ahead. Between Pinewood and Miller's Ridge was a narrow canyon that everyone called Devil's Gap. It was the single most dangerous stretch of road in the entire region. Steep walls on both sides, no alternate routes, no room to maneuver. It was where the last 3 soldiers had died. If the enemy was going to hit them, it would be there. "Approaching Devil's Gap," Sarah announced. "Everyone stay sharp." She could feel the tension in the truck. James had stopped looking at the map. His eyes were scanning the canyon walls, looking for any sign of movement. They entered the gap in a diamond formation, something else that wasn't in the standard playbook. 2 trucks in front, 1 on each side of the road. 2 trucks behind in the same pattern. Maximum visibility, maximum ability to respond to threats from any direction. The canyon walls rose up around them, maybe 60 feet high, covered in scrub brush and loose rock. Perfect cover for someone with a rocket-propelled grenade. Sarah's hands tightened on the wheel. Her eyes flicked constantly between the road ahead and the canyon walls. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every rock looked like cover. "Almost through," James murmured. "Quarter mile to the exit." 200 yards, 150. They burst out of Devil's Gap into the open plateau beyond. No ambush, no attack, nothing. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "One more rotation, then straight to Miller's Ridge," she said. Her voice was calm, but inside her heart was soaring. It had worked. Her strategy had actually worked. They completed the final rotation, regrouped, and rolled into Miller's Ridge at 07:15, exactly on schedule. The forward outpost was a small collection of prefab buildings surrounded by concrete barriers and sandbags. Lieutenant Valdez came out to meet them, looking puzzled. "Captain Mitchell," he said, saluting, "we were monitoring your progress on GPS. Your signal kept jumping all over the place. We thought you were having technical problems." Sarah smiled. "No problems, Lieutenant, just trying something new." They unloaded the medical supplies quickly and efficiently. Everything was accounted for. Not a single box was damaged. Not a single soldier was injured. "Best convoy run I've seen in 6 months, Valdez said, signing off on the delivery manifest. "Whatever you did, it worked." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Sarah said. "Would you mind putting that in writing?" He looked at her curiously but nodded. "Sure thing, Captain." The return trip to Fort Douglas used a completely different set of routes and rotations. By the time they pulled back into the motor pool at 0900, Sarah had successfully completed the most complex convoy operation she'd ever run, and she'd done it without losing a single vehicle or putting a single soldier at risk. James climbed out of his truck, grinning from ear to ear. "That was incredible, Captain, like a magic trick. Now you see us, now you don't." Rodriguez and Kim were celebrating too, bumping fists and laughing with the kind of relief that comes after extreme tension. But Sarah's celebration was cut short by the sight of Colonel Harrison striding across the motor pool, his face red with anger. Major Kohler was right behind him, looking smug. "Captain Mitchell," Harrison barked, "my office now." Sarah had known this was coming. She straightened her uniform, took a deep breath, and followed the colonel back toward the headquarters building. Behind her, she heard James call out, "Good luck, Captain." She was going to need it. Colonel Harrison's office was small and sterile, with thin walls and a single window that looked out over the parade ground. Sarah stood at attention in front of his desk, her hands clasped behind her back, while Harrison paced back and forth like a caged animal. Major Kohler leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching with barely concealed satisfaction. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Harrison demanded. "Any idea at all?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said calmly. "I successfully delivered medical supplies to Miller's Ridge without incident, using an unconventional convoy strategy that." "You disobeyed a direct order?" Harrison slammed his hand on the desk. "I specifically told you that your strategy was rejected. I told you we would continue with standard protocols, and you went out and did whatever you wanted anyway." "With respect, sir, you told me the strategy was rejected for future convoys. You didn't specifically order me not to use it on today's run." "It was a technicality, and they both knew it." "Don't play word games with me, Captain," Harrison said dangerously. "You knew exactly what I meant. You deliberately circumvented my authority." "Sir, 3 soldiers died 2 weeks ago following standard protocols," Sarah said, keeping her voice level. "More will die if we don't change our approach. I had to prove that there was a better way." "You had to prove." Harrison stopped and stared at her. "Captain, do you understand what military discipline means? Do you understand the concept of chain of command? You don't get to decide which orders you follow based on whether you personally agree with them." "I understand chain of command, sir. I also understand that officers have a duty to protect their soldiers. Sometimes those two things conflict." Major Kohler spoke up from his position against the wall. "This is exactly what I warned you about, Colonel. Give people like her an inch and they'll take a mile. She thinks she knows better than everyone else." "People like her?" Sarah turned to look at him. "What exactly do you mean by that, Major?" "I mean reserve officers who think 28 years of driving trucks makes them tactical geniuses," Kohler said, but his eyes told a different story. She'd heard that particular tone before. She knew what he really meant. "Enough," Harrison said. He stopped packing and sat down heavily in his chair. Captain Mitchell, I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a formal disciplinary hearing. You'll surrender your vehicle keys and your access to the motor pool. You're confined to base until this matter is resolved. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. Administrative leave was often the first step toward discharge. Sir, I... Dismissed, Captain. There was nothing else to say. Sarah saluted, turned on her heel, and walked out. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. She'd known there would be consequences, but hearing the actual words made it real. She'd just thrown away her entire career. Outside headquarters, James was waiting for her. Captain, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I was the one who suggested. It's not your fault, Sergeant, Sarah interrupted. I made the decision. I take full responsibility. But it worked, James said, his voice rising with frustration. The strategy worked perfectly. Everyone saw it. Valdez saw it. He's writing up a report. Doesn't that count for something? Not to Colonel Harrison, Sarah said. To him, I'm just an insubordinate reserve officer who needs to be put in her place. She walked back to her truck, her personal truck, not one of the military vehicles, and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Through the windshield, she could see the motor pool, the barracks, the obstacle course where she'd trained countless young soldiers over the years. This base had been her second home for most of her adult life. The Army had given her purpose, structure, and a way to serve something bigger than herself, and now it was all slipping away. Her phone buzzed, a text from her daughter, Emily. Mom, I just heard from Sergeant Chen. Is it true? Are they really going to kick you out? News traveled fast on a small base. Sarah didn't know what to reply. She set the phone down and started the truck. Right now, she needed to get away from the base, away from the stares and whispers, away from everything. She drove into Cedar Springs, the little town where she'd grown up. Not much had changed in all the years she'd been gone. Same dusty Main Street, same feed store and hardware shop, same diner with its faded red awning. She pulled into the parking lot of the diner and sat there, engine running, trying to decide if she had the energy to go inside and face people. The decision was made for her when someone tapped on her window. It was Martha Henderson, Bill Henderson's wife. Martha had to be pushing 80 now, but she still had the same bright eyes and warm smile that Sarah remembered from childhood. Sarah Mitchell, you get yourself out of that truck and come have some coffee with me, Martha said. It wasn't a request. Inside the diner, Martha led her to a corner booth and ordered 2 coffees and a slice of apple pie without asking if Sarah wanted any. When the waitress left, Martha fixed Sarah with a penetrating stare. All right, honey, tell me what's going on. Sarah found herself explaining everything. The rejected strategy, the unauthorized convoy run, the confrontation with Colonel Harrison, the administrative leave. It all came pouring out in a way it wouldn't have with most people. But Martha had known Sarah since she was a little girl. Martha had been there when Sarah's mother died of pneumonia the winter Sarah turned 14. Martha had been there when Tom got his cancer diagnosis. Martha was family in all the ways that mattered. When Sarah finished, Martha nodded slowly. So you broke the rules to save lives and now they're punishing you for it. I knew the consequences, Sarah said. I couldn't stand by and watch more people die when I knew there was a better way. That's because you're a good soldier, Martha said firmly. A real soldier, not like those bureaucrats who care more about their careers than about the kids they're supposed to be protecting. I don't know if that matters anymore, Sarah said quietly. Harrison's going to make an example of me. I'll be lucky if I don't face a court-martial. Martha took a sip of her coffee and then smiled, a sly look that Sarah recognized from childhood. It was the look Martha got when she was about to do something clever. You know what your problem is, Sarah? You're fighting this the Army way, all formal and by the book, but this is Cedar Springs. We do things different here. What do you mean? I mean you need to fight smart, not just hard, Martha said. You need allies. You need people who can make noise that the Army has to listen to. Martha, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but... Hush now and listen, Martha interrupted. My nephew works for the Wyoming Tribune. He's always looking for good stories, and a woman soldier getting punished for saving lives, that's a very good story. Sarah shook her head. I can't go to the press. That would make everything worse. Maybe for the Army, Martha said. But sometimes the army needs to be embarrassed into doing the right thing. You think they want headlines about how they're court-martialing a hero, about how they'd rather lose soldiers than admit a woman had a better idea. "I'm not a hero," Sarah protested. "Yes, you are," Martha said simply. "You just don't know it yet." Before Sarah could argue further, her phone rang. It was Lieutenant Valdez from Miller's Ridge. "Captain Mitchell," he said when she answered. "I heard about what happened. That's complete nonsense, ma'am. I want you to know that I've sent my report directly to Regional Command, not through Fort Douglas. I detailed everything: the successful delivery, the innovative tactics, the complete absence of incidents. I made it very clear that your strategy was brilliant." Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. "Thank you, Lieutenant. That means more than you know." "There's something else," Valdez continued. "I started asking around. Turns out I'm not the only one who thinks this whole thing is wrong. A lot of people are talking about it. Junior officers, NCOs, even some of the civilians on base. People are angry, Captain." After she hung up, Martha was smiling. "See, you've got allies, you've got people who know the truth. All you need now is to make sure the right people hear it." Sarah looked down at her coffee, thinking. She'd spent her entire career playing by the rules, keeping her head down, not making waves. Where had it gotten her? Disrespected, dismissed, and now facing the end of her career. Maybe it was time to try something different. "Okay," she said to Martha. "Call your nephew, but I'm not going to trash the army. I'm just going to tell the truth." "That's all you need to do, honey," Martha said, patting her hand. "The truth is on your side." That evening, Sarah sat in Martha's living room and talked to Ben Reynolds, Martha's nephew. He was a young reporter, maybe 30, with earnest eyes and a digital recorder that he set on the coffee table between them. "Just tell me what happened," he said, "in your own words." So she did. She told him about the convoy losses, the rejected strategy, the unauthorized run, and the successful result. She told him about the dead soldiers and her belief that more would die if nothing changed. She told him about being placed on administrative leave despite proving her strategy worked. She didn't trash Colonel Harrison or Major Kohler. She didn't complain about discrimination or unfair treatment. She just laid out the facts clearly and calmly, the way she'd learned to do in 28 years of military reports. When she finished, Ben was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Captain, can I ask you something? Why did you do it? You knew you'd get in trouble. Why take that risk?" Sarah thought about the question. She thought about the 3 dead soldiers. She thought about Emily, who wanted to serve. She thought about all the young men and women who put on the uniform and trusted their officers to value their lives. "Because that's what leaders do," she said simply. "They take risks to protect their people, even when it costs them everything." Ben nodded slowly. "That's a hell of a quote, Captain, thank you." The article ran 2 days later on the front page of the Wyoming Tribune. The headline read, "Local soldier faces punishment after saving lives with unconventional strategy." By noon, it had been picked up by the Associated Press. By evening, it was national news. Sarah woke up the next morning to find 17 missed calls on her phone and her driveway blocked by a news van from a Cheyenne television station. She peeked through the curtains of her bedroom window and saw a young woman with perfect hair and a microphone standing on her front lawn, speaking to a camera. "This is insane," Sarah muttered, pulling on her old Army Reserve sweatshirt and jeans. She hadn't expected this. She'd thought maybe the local paper would run a small story, maybe raise a few eyebrows in regional command. She hadn't expected it to explode into a media circus. Her phone rang again. This time she answered it. "Mom, oh my God, you're on CNN." Emily's voice was breathless with excitement. "They're calling you the convoy captain. They're saying you might have revolutionized military logistics." "Emily, slow down." "No, seriously, Mom, you need to turn on the TV. This is huge." Sarah walked into her living room and turned on the television. Sure enough, there was her Army Reserve photo, the one from 3 years ago where she looked stern and professional, plastered on the screen. A news anchor was discussing the controversy at Fort Douglas, where a female reserve captain claims she was punished for implementing a life-saving strategy that her male superiors rejected. Sarah winced. The story was getting simplified, sensationalized. That wasn't what she'd told Ben Reynolds. She'd been careful not to make it about gender or personality conflicts. But the media didn't care about nuance. They wanted a simple narrative: brave woman soldier versus stubborn male commanders. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Captain, you need to see the base. There are protesters." "Protesters?" Sarah said aloud. "What protesters?" She threw on a jacket and drove to Fort Douglas. As she approached the main gate, she saw what James meant. There were maybe 50 people gathered outside the fence, holding signs. Some of the signs read, "Listen to Captain Mitchell and save our soldiers." Others were more pointed. "Fire Harrison and women know best." Sarah groaned. This was getting out of control. The gate guard waved her through. She was still technically assigned to the base, even if she was on administrative leave, and she parked near the headquarters building. As she walked across the parade ground, soldiers kept stopping her, wanting to shake her hand or tell her they supported her. "Captain Mitchell, what you did was incredible," a young private said. "My brother's in logistics. He says everyone's talking about your strategy." An older sergeant pulled her aside. "Ma'am, I've been in the Army 22 years. I've seen a lot of officers come and go. You're one of the good ones. Don't let them grind you down." It was overwhelming. Sarah had spent her entire career trying to blend in, to not draw attention, to just do her job quietly and competently. Now suddenly she was the center of a national controversy, and she had no idea how to handle it. She was heading toward her quarters when she saw Major Kohler storming across the parade ground toward her. His face was purple with rage. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" he snarled when he reached her. "You had to go running to the press like some attention-seeking drama queen." Sarah kept her voice level. "I told the truth, Major, that's all." "You made this base look like a bunch of incompetent sexists." Kohler jabbed his finger toward her face. "You've damaged morale, undermined command authority, and turned Fort Douglas into a national laughingstock. I hope you're proud of yourself." "I'm proud that I tried to save lives," Sarah said. "I'm sorry if the truth makes you uncomfortable." "The truth," Kohler laughed bitterly. "The truth is that you're an insubordinate reserve officer who thinks she's smarter than everyone else. The truth is that your little stunt could have gotten people killed if it had gone wrong. The truth is that you don't belong in uniform." "That's enough, Major." Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the confrontation. He approached from the headquarters building, looking exhausted. "Captain Mitchell in my office. Now, Major Kohler, you're dismissed." Kohler glared at both of them, then turned and walked away, his hands clenched into fists. In Harrison's office, the colonel sat down heavily and gestured for Sarah to take a seat as well. This was different from their last meeting. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked defeated. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked quietly. "Sir, I've had calls from 3 different generals today," Harrison interrupted. "I've had calls from congressmen, from reporters, from the governor of Wyoming. The secretary of the Army's office wants a full report. There are protesters outside my base. I have soldiers taking sides, arguing in the mess hall, filming videos for social media. You've created a complete circus." "I didn't mean for it to become this," Sarah said honestly. "I just wanted people to understand what happened." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised her. "Tell me about Afghanistan." Sarah blinked. "Sir, your first deployment. You were there in 2004, right? What was it like?" Sarah wasn't sure where this was going, but she answered truthfully. "It was chaos, sir. The insurgency was ramping up. Supply lines were getting hit constantly. We lost a lot of good people." "And what did you learn?" "I learned that the enemy doesn't care about our regulations or our procedures," Sarah said. "They adapt, they innovate, and if we don't do the same, we lose." Harrison nodded slowly. "I was in Iraq in 2006, Ramadi. We had a company commander who kept doing things by the book, even when the book wasn't working. He got 16 men killed in 3 months before they finally relieved him. I was a lieutenant then. I swore that if I ever had command, I'd never be so rigid that I couldn't see when something wasn't working." He looked at Sarah with tired eyes. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I started caring more about protocol than results, more about appearances than effectiveness. And you just reminded me of that in the most embarrassing way possible." Sarah didn't know what to say. "Your strategy worked," Harrison continued. "Lieutenant Valdez's report was very clear on that, and after the media attention, I started getting messages from other officers around the country. Turns out several of them have been using similar tactics: unconventional routing, variable timing, constant rotation. They've all seen significant reductions in convoy losses." He pulled out a file and slid it across the desk. This is from a logistics officer in North Carolina. He reduced his convoy losses by 87% using a strategy very similar to yours. This one's from Georgia, 92% reduction. Texas, 86%. They've all been doing it quietly without authorization because they knew if they went through official channels, they'd be shut down. Sarah looked at the reports stunned. "Sir, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," Harrison said. "Because we don't share information. We don't encourage innovation. We punish people who think differently, and we reward people who keep their heads down and follow orders, even when those orders are killing soldiers." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the protesters. "The disciplinary hearing is canceled, Captain. You're reinstated to full duty, and I'm officially requesting that Regional Command adopt your convoy strategy as standard protocol for all logistics operations in high-risk zones." Sarah felt dizzy. "Sir, I thank you." "Don't thank me," Harrison said. "You shouldn't have had to risk your career to do the right thing. That's my failure as a commander, but I'm going to fix it." He turned to face her. "I'm also recommending you for promotion to major, and I'm putting you in charge of training other logistics officers on your strategy. If this is going to become standard protocol, we need someone who knows it inside and out. Someone who has the courage to stand up and fight for what's right." Sarah stood up, overwhelmed. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help me fix this broken system," Harrison said. "Say you'll help me make sure that the next time someone has a good idea, we listen to them instead of dismissing them." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "I can do that." As she left Harrison's office, she felt like she was floating. Everything had changed in a matter of days. From facing a court-martial to being recommended for promotion. From being dismissed and mocked to being asked to train others. But as she walked across the parade ground, she saw Major Kohler watching her from the doorway of the barracks. The look on his face made it clear that while she might have won this battle, the war was far from over. That evening, Sarah received a call from an unlisted number. "Captain Mitchell, this is General Patricia Rawlings, Deputy Commander of Army Logistics Command." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. General Rawlings was a legend, the highest-ranking woman in Army logistics, known for her brilliant mind and no-nonsense approach. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said. "I've been reading about your convoy strategy," Rawlings said. "I've also been reviewing the incident reports from Fort Douglas and a dozen other bases. Captain, I want you to come to Washington. I'm convening a special task force to overhaul our logistics protocols, and I want you to be part of it." Sarah sat down heavily on her couch. "Ma'am, I'm just a reserve captain." "You're a reserve captain who just proved that our entire approach to convoy security is outdated and unnecessarily dangerous," Rawlings interrupted. "You did what dozens of career officers were too scared or too proud to do. That's exactly the kind of thinking I need." "When would you need me?" 2 weeks, Rawlings said. "I'll have the orders cut tomorrow. Pack for 3 months. This is going to be intensive work." After she hung up, Sarah just sat there for a moment trying to process everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. You're changing the Army. You're changing everything." Maybe she was, or maybe she was just doing what any good soldier should do, adapting, innovating, and putting the lives of her people first. 3 months later, Sarah stood in a briefing room at the Pentagon, looking at a wall of screens displaying convoy operations from across the country. Officers from every branch of the military filled the seats, all of them watching as she walked them through the final version of what was now officially called the Mitchell Protocol. "The key," Sarah explained, using a laser pointer to highlight routes on the screen, "is unpredictability. The enemy can only ambush convoys if they know where those convoys will be. By using variable routing, constant rotation, and coordinated timing, we deny them that knowledge." She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics. Over the past 3 months, bases that have implemented the Mitchell Protocol have seen an average reduction in convoy losses of 88%. More importantly, we've reduced casualties by 92%. A colonel from Fort Hood raised his hand. "Captain, excuse me, Major Mitchell, what about the increased fuel costs?" Sarah nodded. She'd expected that question. "Yes, fuel consumption increases by approximately 12%. But when you factor in the cost of replacing destroyed vehicles, lost supplies, and medical care for injured personnel, we're actually saving the Army approximately $43 million annually. and that's not counting the immeasurable value of the lives we're saving. General Rawlings stood up from her seat in the back. Thank you, Major Mitchell. As of today, the Mitchell Protocol is being adopted as standard operating procedure for all logistics operations in high-risk zones. Every base commander will receive training materials within the next 2 weeks. The room erupted in applause. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. She still wasn't used to being the center of attention, even after 3 months of working with the task force. After the briefing, General Rawlings pulled Sarah aside. That was excellent work, Sarah. You should be proud. Thank you, ma'am. I couldn't have done it without the task force. Don't sell yourself short, Rawlings said. You had the courage to stand up when no one else would. That's rare, which is why I want to talk to you about your next assignment. Sarah's heart sank a little. She'd been hopping to return to Fort Douglas to get back to the simple work of driving convoys and training soldiers. She missed Cedar Springs. She missed Emily, who she'd only seen twice in the past 3 months. Ma'am, I was hopping to return to my reserve unit. I'm offering you a position here at the Pentagon, Rawlings interrupted. Full active duty. You'd be working directly with me, continuing to develop and refine logistics protocols. It's a promotion to lieutenant colonel with a significant pay increase. It was an incredible offer, the kind of opportunity most officers would kill for, a chance to shape Army policy at the highest levels, job security, prestige, a career path that could lead all the way to a general's star. But as tempting as it was, Sarah knew it wasn't what she wanted. Ma'am, I'm honored, Sarah said carefully. But I'm a driver. That's what I've always been. And with respect, the Army needs people in the field implementing these strategies, not just people in Washington writing them. Rawlings studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled. You know what? You're absolutely right. We have plenty of people who want to work in the Pentagon. We need more people like you who want to be where the work actually happens. She extended her hand. Go home, Major Mitchell. Train your soldiers. Keep making the Army better from the ground up. Sarah shook her hand gratefully. Thank you, ma'am. The drive back to Wyoming took 2 days. Sarah could have flown, but she wanted the time to think, to process everything that had happened. She drove through the night, watching the landscape change from the urban sprawl of the East Coast to the wide-open plains of the Midwest to the rocky hills of Wyoming. She arrived in Cedar Springs just after dawn. The town was exactly as she'd left it, same dusty streets, same quiet morning routine. She pulled into her driveway and just sat in the truck for a moment, breathing in the familiar air. She was home. Later that morning, Sarah drove to Fort Douglas. As she pulled up to the gate, the guard saluted smartly. Welcome back, Major Mitchell. Good to have you home. Good to be back, Sarah said. The base was buzzing with activity. She could see trucks moving through the motor pool, soldiers running through PT exercises, the familiar rhythm of military life. But there was something different, too. There was an energy, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. James Chen came running out of the motor pool when he saw her truck. Major, you're back. When did you get in? About an hour ago, Sarah said, climbing out. How's everything been? Amazing, James said. We've been running the Mitchell Protocol on every convoy since you left. 0 losses, 0 injuries. The soldiers love it. They say they actually feel safe now. Sarah felt a warmth in her chest. That was what mattered, not the awards or the promotions or the national attention, just knowing that soldiers were coming home safe. Where's Colonel Harrison? She asked. His office. He's been waiting for you. Sarah walked to the headquarters building. Harrison's door was open. He looked up when she knocked, and a genuine smile crossed his face. Major Mitchell, welcome back. How was Washington? Educational, sir, Sarah said, but I'm glad to be home. Harrison gestured for her to sit. I want to apologize again for how I handled things initially. I let my pride and my fear of change override my judgment. That was inexcusable. You made it right, sir, Sarah said. That's what matters. I also want you to know that Major Kohler has been transferred, Harrison continued. It was his request, but I was happy to approve it. He's at Fort Bragg now. Sarah wasn't surprised. Kohler had been a problem from the beginning, and his attitude had only gotten worse as the Mitchell Protocol gained recognition. It was better for everyone that he was gone. There's something else, Harrison said. He pulled out a folder. I'm putting you in charge of the entire logistics division for Fort Douglas and 3 surrounding bases. You'll oversee all convoy operations, all training, and all strategic planning. It's a big job. Sarah took the folder, feeling the weight of it, both literally and figuratively. Sir, I'm honored, but I'm still a reserve officer. Are you sure? I'm sure, Harrison said firmly. You're the best logistics officer I've ever worked with, reserve or active duty. And after everything that's happened, I think the Army has finally learned that the best people for the job aren't always the ones who fit the traditional mold. That afternoon, Sarah drove out to Martha Henderson's house. The old woman was in her garden, pulling weeds with the same determination she'd had for the past 60 years. Well, look who's back, Martha said, standing up and brushing dirt from her hands. The famous Major Mitchell. Sarah laughed. I'm not famous, Martha. Tell that to my nephew. He won 3 journalism awards for that article about you. Says you're the best story he's ever covered. They sat on Martha's porch, drinking lemonade and watching the sun move across the Wyoming sky. It was peaceful, familiar, perfect. You did good, Sarah, Martha said quietly. Your daddy would have been proud, your mama too. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. I just did what needed to be done. That's what heroes do, Martha said. They don't set out to change the world. They just do what's right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That evening, Emily drove home from college for the weekend. She burst through the door and threw her arms around Sarah. Mom, I can't believe you're actually home. You've been gone forever. 3 months, Sarah said, hugging her daughter tight, but it felt like forever. Over dinner, Emily told her about school, about her classes, about her decision to join ROTC. Because of you, Mom, you showed me what it means to be a real soldier, not just following orders but knowing when to question them, being brave enough to do what's right. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. Just promise me you'll be smart about it, pick your battles carefully, make sure the fight is worth the cost. You did, Emily pointed out. I got lucky, Sarah said. It could have ended very differently. But it didn't, Emily said. You changed everything, Mom. You made the Army better. You saved lives. That's what I want to do too. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in the Fort Douglas motor pool at 0500, preparing to lead her first convoy under the new organizational structure. She had a team of 8 trucks, all driven by soldiers she'd personally trained on the Mitchell Protocol. But this convoy was different. This wasn't a routine supply run to a forward outpost. This was a demonstration for visiting officers from 6 different bases, all of whom wanted to see the Mitchell Protocol in action. All right, everyone, Sarah said over the radio. Remember your training, stay sharp, stay flexible, and trust the system. Let's show them how it's done. The convoy rolled out, and for the next 4 hours, Sarah led them through the most complex series of rotations and route changes she'd ever designed. They split, converged, rotated, and moved through the landscape like a perfectly choreographed dance. When they returned to base, the visiting officers were stunned. I've never seen anything like it, a colonel from Texas said. It's like watching a magic trick. 1 second the convoy is there, the next it's gone, then it reappears from a completely different direction. That's the point, Sarah explained. The enemy can't target what they can't predict. Over the following months, Sarah's reputation continued to grow. Officers from across the military came to Fort Douglas to train under her. The Mitchell Protocol was expanded and adapted for different terrain and threat environments. Casualties continued to drop. But for Sarah, the most satisfying moments weren't the awards or the recognition. They were the quiet moments, like when a young soldier came to her office to say thank you because he'd made it home safe to see his newborn daughter. Or when a convoy returned without a scratch after traversing some of the most dangerous terrain in the country. Those were the moments that mattered. 1 year after the original controversial convoy run, Sarah stood on a stage at Fort Douglas, surrounded by soldiers, officers, and civilians from Cedar Springs. General Rawlings had come from Washington to present her with the Legion of Merit for exceptional service. Major Mitchell represents the best of what the Army can be, Rawlings said. She had the courage to question outdated methods, the skill to develop better solutions, and the integrity to stand by her convictions even when it cost her everything. Because of her, thousands of soldiers have come home safe. Because of her, the Army is stronger, smarter, and more adaptable. She is an inspiration to us all. As Sarah accepted the medal, she looked out at the crowd. She saw James, Rodriguez, and Kim, her original convoy team, all of whom had been promoted. She saw Lieutenant Valdez, who had driven down from Miller's Ridge for the ceremony. She saw Martha Henderson, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. She saw Emily in her ROTC uniform, beaming with pride. And in the back, standing quietly, she saw Colonel Harrison. He caught her eye and nodded, a gesture of respect and gratitude. Sarah had spent 29 years in the Army, most of them trying to prove that she belonged, that she was good enough, that she deserved to be taken seriously. She'd faced discrimination, disrespect, and dismissal. But in the end, she hadn't proven herself by becoming what they wanted her to be. She'd proven herself by being exactly who she was, a trucker who knew the roads, a soldier who valued lives over protocol, and a woman who refused to stay quiet when she knew there was a better way. After the ceremony, as Sarah was talking with well-wishers, a young female private approached her nervously. "Major Mitchell, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm in logistics and I was thinking about leaving the Army because people keep telling me I don't belong here, that women aren't cut out for this kind of work. But then I heard about you and I realized that if you could stand up and fight for what's right, then maybe I can too." Sarah put her hand on the young woman's shoulder. "You belong here just as much as anyone else. Don't let anyone tell you different. And if they try, you stand tall and prove them wrong, not by being like them, but by being the best version of yourself." The private saluted, tears in her eyes. "Yes, ma'am, I will." As the sun set over Fort Douglas that evening, Sarah drove home through Cedar Springs, past the familiar landmarks of her childhood. The feed store where her daddy used to buy supplies, the church where she'd married Tom, the high school where Emily had graduated, the diner where Martha still served the best apple pie in Wyoming. This was home. This was where she belonged. Not in Washington, not chasing promotions or prestige, but here, doing the work that mattered, training soldiers and making sure they came home safe. Her phone buzzed with a text from General Rawlings. "Still sure you don't want that Pentagon job? The offer's always open." Sarah smiled and typed back, "I'm exactly where I need to be." And she was. She'd fought her battle, stood her ground, and changed a system that needed changing. She'd proven that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. She'd proven that sometimes the most outrageous strategies were the ones that saved the most lives. And she'd proven that one person, standing up for what was right, could make all the difference in the world. Sarah pulled into her driveway as the last light faded from the sky. Tomorrow, she'd be back in the motor pool, training another group of drivers. She'd be checking routes, reviewing protocols, and making sure her soldiers had everything they needed to stay safe. It was simple work, important work, the kind of work that didn't make headlines but changed lives every single day. And for Major Sarah Mitchell, the trucker who'd revolutionized military logistics, that was more than enough. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.